And Jeremy, I'm told you're an expert in the Far East precious metals market. Can you tell us a little bit about the history of the gold market out there, particularly in China?
Yes, of course. So I've been out in Hong Kong now for almost 5 years. The Chinese gold market has really been developing very quickly in the past, I'd say, 5 years, having had a transformational change in 2002. Up until 2002, the PBOC, the Central Bank of China, was responsible for all gold transactions and gold imports into China. At that point, they decided to launch the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And the gold exchange for the last 15 years has been running the gold market in China. At the same time, China also opened up the domestic gold market, so the general public were allowed to buy gold for the first time. And so this was a transformational change for the market. Coming forward, in 2014, the Chinese started to open up the domestic market. So up until then, we had 12 years of growth of a purely domestic physical gold market. 2014 was the launch of the what was called the International Board, and that allowed Chinese companies to do business offshore. It was a they could transact gold in the free trade zone in offshore CNH. So Chinese companies could do business offshore in the free trade zone, and international companies could also do gold offshore in CNH. Two things around that. First thing is it allowed access to the China market, to the international market. And secondly, it also encouraged the use of offshore RMB, which was a strategic monetary policy from the government. Coming forward, the market is now developing again in terms of its products. So now the Shanghai Gold Exchange has launched. So now the Shanghai Gold Exchange has launched new products, new derivative products. So no longer being solely focused on physical gold bars, now looking more at a derivatives market. They recently launched their benchmark, so allowing investor products. So we now have a transformational change again for the Chinese market. And so I think this is going to continue as we go forward into the next few years, and we see the Chinese domestic players start moving into the offshore markets, and we see the offshore players start moving into the domestic China market.
So how do you see that affecting the future relationship between China and London?
Well, I think that we're going to see a narrowing, an improved relationship.
Back a little bit of the question.
So regarding the connection between China and London, I think we're going to see a narrowing of the relationship, an improving of the relationship between the two places. So the Chinese banks will start doing more business into London, and we're already seeing that. ICBC, Investment and Standard Bank. We're seeing other Chinese banks becoming members of the benchmark in London. We're also seeing international banks starting to do more business into China. And so we're seeing, I suppose, a narrowing of the two markets and a connection between the two. And that is will be going through the International Board of the Shanghai Gold Exchange.
If I asked you to look at a crystal ball, how do you see that developing?
So in the future, I think China has a long-term plan, especially around gold, and gold is seen as a currency. And obviously encouraging the wider use of the RMB. I think we're going to see an increased use of trading of gold in offshore RMB. And as we heard from the economists earlier today, it seems that the Americans want to sort of pull back from having the US dollar as the currency of choice for trade, and the Chinese looking to step forward in terms of maybe replacing that gap with RMB as being the currency of trade in the future.
Interesting. Final question. China has been a big driver of the Bitcoin exchange. How do you see the future of China linked with digital currency?
So China obviously a big player in the Bitcoin market, and it's been well publicised as what's happened in that space. I think one thing that's going to be developing is that China is really at the forefront of technological development. Payment systems, the use of iPhone technology, sort of WeChat, WePay, Alipay. I think being at the forefront of this market, and from what I understand, that these companies are now looking at potentially having gold on some of these platforms, could be a game changer for the international markets. We're already seeing many fintech companies outside of China setting up digital gold. I would not be at all surprised to see the same thing happening in China. That will be a bit of a challenge, I think, for the Chinese market, because digital gold, the question then, where does that fall? Is it a currency? Does that come under the PBOC? Is it an exchange? Should that be part of the CSRC? So in terms of sort of control or regulation of this market, I think that will be a challenge for the Chinese. However, I think it's a challenge that's going to come pretty quickly. I think they are at the forefront of development in these markets, and I think it's something that's going to be people will be talking about it in the next 6 to 12 months.
So in terms of the gold market, it's all eyes on China?
For me, I think so. I think in terms of the growth of the global gold market, I think China is where the action's going to be, and I think it's going to be in the derivative space rather than the physical space. And that, as that derivative market grows in China, we'll see that starting to influence the global derivative market for gold.